So it was a few weeks ago that we had the 10-year anniversary of Hurricane Katrina. You actually had an interview with the former director of FEMA, Michael Brown, which many people probably know. Famously, George W. Bush, said, doing a heck of a job, Brownie. And so it became a very big thing that people made fun of Michael Brown for the horrible job he did at FEMA. So how did on the 10-year anniversary of Katrina, how's Michael Brown doing? How's he feeling?
Michael Brown is doing awesome, actually. Michael Brown is loving life. And he made that very clear to me. He is totally out of the disaster aid business in terms of, he doesn't do consulting for disaster aid companies anymore. He's a conservative radio host.
I think we're all better off that he's not in disaster aid anymore. I think the planet is better served having him not be in that line of work.
Well, he does talk about disaster aid as an expert. So he gives a couple page speeches every year. He appears on Fox News pretty often. Pretty often for someone who's not an actual contributor to Fox News, like maybe a couple times a year. Mm-hmm. He'll be on like Neil Cavuto or something talking about how this proposed FEMA policy is bad, or the way they're dealing with this disaster should be like this. So he's still a pundit in that way. He's just not really making a ton of money off of it. I guess I don't know how much his speeches run for, but mostly what he's doing is just like baseline conservative punditry across the political spectrum, sometimes having to do with FEMA disaster management stuff.
Well, one thing I really enjoyed in the article is that you were very nice to him, and then he was very defensive. So this is just like he was, I guess, rightfully so, because most people do kind of look at him as a punchline, but his defenses were way up. Tell us about that.
Well, he was, obviously, you guys know that I work for a progressive news website, right?
Right.
So I'm open about how I lean on certain things. So I wanted to let him know that I was going to treat him fairly. And what I wanted to do in the article was I wanted to look at basically his foray into disaster management work after Katrina, because that sort of hasn't been looked at that much. Right after Katrina, he decided to go into consulting for disaster management. So sort of consulting with companies on making products for disasters and stuff like that. And I wanted to see how that went. And he sort of maybe at first thought that wasn't really my intention. So he was skeptical. He said, you think I'm an idiot. You think that I screwed the whole thing up. And I was just like, I'm not trying to dwell on that, And so then we were able to sort of move forward in discussing his business ventures after Katrina. But I guess I don't blame him, like he is the target to blame for that storm. And I sort of left that to everybody else to do. I was like, you guys can decide who you want to blame. I'm just gonna go over here and look at his disaster work.
Right. So so he's not in disaster work anymore. It essentially didn't go particularly well for him, did it?
It did not go well for him. He attributes it to he just didn't like it. He told me that it wasn't fun for him. And he just wasn't having a good time. The people that I talked to, they didn't outwardly blame any of like the failures of their products on him.
Right.
But they were just like, yeah, this didn't work. It didn't work. It fizzled out. And some other places that he would try and get business from just they sort of didn't want to be associated with him. So it just fizzled. He said that there were other places that actually liked him more because of what happened, because of how vilified he became. And I think that we're sort of seeing that now in the presidential election, right? Like, there are people across the country that, like, if the Washington media doesn't like you, if things are going bad for you in Washington, D.C., and you're anti-establishment, then a lot of people in the country are like, maybe there is something right with you. So I think that did happen to Michael Brown in a sense.
One last thing. You actually wrote a second piece on this. So it's very interesting that a man who was charged with dealing with floods is also now a man-made climate change denier and does not believe that the sea levels are rising, correct? Like, he's pretty much, no, this isn't a big deal.
Yeah, and you know that this is like a very, this is like my topic area, right?
Exactly.
Is that, like, when, I just don't understand it when you are in charge of disasters like flooding, storm surges, things that really harm people.
Yeah.
And you don't acknowledge what climate change is going to do to increase the risk of those disasters across the country, especially somebody who was in charge of Hurricane Katrina, which hit Louisiana, which is one of the most affected states by sea level rise. I mean, with oil and gas development, et cetera, plus sea level rise, their coastline is disappearing at an enormously fast rate. And that's going to be an issue when there are more hurricanes because their coastline is going more inward, so making people's developments, people's homes more and more vulnerable. And it was just my opinion that it's prudent to recognize the threat of man-made climate change if you are in charge of disaster relief.